Rigney, R-I-G-N-E-Y, Rigney J. Sackley, Jr., born Chicago, Illinois, May 19th, 1925. I started building model planes as a child and read pulp magazines such as G8 and his Battle Aces, World War I, Spads and Fokkers and things of that sort, and just was, entranced with the idea of aviation. And I think as a child, memory suggests I had a flight in a Ford Trimotor down in Florida with my parents, which is a unique and loud and uncommon experience. And from there, the inclination in wanting to get into service was simply go for the Air Force.
We were talking just a little bit about, before we started the interview, just about Pearl Harbor and the start of the war. What do you remember about that time when you were in high school and what you were doing?
Probably freshman or sophomore in high school in a school in Chicago. Changed high schools in that I was going to a Catholic high school, and they did not have a pre-flight program, but the public school did. So I transferred to one called Sen, which had a pre-flight program, and I thought I knew the direction I wanted to head in, and that would be useful. At age 17, I qualified for the aviation cadet program, passed the physical and what I call the mental exam, a written exam actually, and early June I was notified by the Air Force, then Army Air Force, come ahead, we want you. So I missed my graduation, which didn't matter all that much, and went into basic training, and if you thought you were going to be a special person, you weren't. You were a GI, and somebody who was a sergeant had 3 stripes. He was God. He told you where to go and when to go and what to do when you got there. Basic training was Shepherd Field in Texas in July, August, fiercely hot. It seemed like you get dust blown in your face even while it was raining, but red dust was all over the place. I did learn one thing. I learned how to goof off early. I got 16 hours of KP. At the end of that, I had hauled garbage buckets. I had wrapped my arms around sides of beef. I had hauled sacks of flour and rice and whatever, and I was so foul-smelling, I tried to turn in the fatigues, and the guy at the supply said, here's where you take them and burn them. We don't even want them back. It was that bad. So learning to goof off, one morning we get out front and nobody knew who was who, but said, you 10 are on KP. I was one of the 10, but nobody had any names. So as they started leading us through the mess hall, it just happened that I took a wrong turn. They couldn't come look for me because they didn't know who was in this group that they had sliced off. So anyway, one sergeant at a given point said, Rigney, he says, you're one of the best goof-offs I've ever met, but don't do it around here. He says, find another place on the base to do that. So entered basic training. I was 5'9", 160 pounds. After road runs, calisthenics, obstacle courses, double time to here, there, and the other place, I grew 3 inches in about 2 months. So I went from 5'9", 160 to 6 feet, 160. And then left there, went to Buffalo, New York for the initial flight training, stayed at the University of Buffalo, a grand sounding place, Grover Cleveland Alexander Country Club. Like, oh my God, isn't that wonderful? It was okay. At any rate, was there for a few months for the beginning of flight training. One of the interesting little things, and mine is not a story, there I was at 30,000 feet, but I had seen a girl, I thought, gee, I wish I had a girl like that. And it turned out one of the other cadets was dating her, and he made a no-no, and he was restricted, could not leave what they called the base, even though it was a college. And I suppose he looked around and thought, well, this guy's kind of young and dumb. It would be okay to have him go meet her because I can't even contact her. I did go meet her, and he never did see her again. So anyway, fast forwarding, about a year later, took a ship, English ship, god awful, about 10,000 of us on board and headed for England. Took 12 days. I was seasick most all the way. A man by the name of Max Stone, who was older, supplied me with oranges and soda crackers, and that's all I ate for about 12 days. I couldn't eat anything else. Getting off the ship, I was given a submachine gun and told to guard the mail that was being unloaded. How they chose me, God only knows, but it seems to go this way through service. First stop was replacement depot. From replacement depot sent to USTAF, United States Strategical Air Forces, which was the headquarters for all the air forces. On a jacket out in the car, there's a patch for them which says USS TAF. It's sort of a American flag in the form of a shield. It was also in the same compound as SHAEF, Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Forces, some fellow by the name of Dwight D. Eisenhower. We did not directly associate, but he was there and I was there. After being there just a short time, was assigned to an 8th Air Force project. There was a problem that had developed and had been going on, I guess, for a while. And that is with a raid over the continent, nothing having to do with enemy action. Some of the B-17s, and I presume 24s as well, were going down simply as they ran out of fuel. They all started out with the same bomb load, same crew number, same fuel load, everything else, and pretty much the same, not totally consistent takeoff time. A man wrote a book entitled Screaming Eagle. He was a colonel when he was leading a flight in over the continent, and on the way back, he was where others were running out of fuel. And as he writes the book, Screaming Eagle, he was a colonel, and he says they put it in a slightly descending attitude and did everything they could to stretch their being able to stay in the air. They dumped the waste guns, they dropped the ball turret, and over the radio he instructed the other bombers in a similar situation to do the same thing. They lost somewhere between 13 and 17 planes on that particular raid, and he wasn't aware how many went down, because simply running out of fuel, maybe just landed in the channel. As he was interrogated at the end of the mission, he felt that they really didn't pay any attention to this. Well, as he was saying he didn't feel they paid any attention to this, we were working on the problem. We had put together cameras in the back of the cockpits, and every 10 to 12 seconds they took pictures of the instrumentation, altitude, airspeed, fuel mixture, manifold pressure, and a couple of other things. And they equipped us with, much before computers, slide rules. So we had the slide rules in a particular formula, and with books began to annotate all these various readings.
How did they ever solve that?
My thought would be that as these people were flying their close formations, one, you're trying to hold formation. Two, as you just barely got over the continent, you had anti-aircraft fire. At a given point, you had enemy fighter plane doing their best to blow you out of the sky. Pilot and co-pilot were pretty well occupied with what they were doing. Their mind was not particularly on, gee, I need to extend my fuel. But eventually, and I never saw the finished product, but a little pamphlet or booklet was put together to allow them to read it and hopefully to help them how to extend their fuel, at what altitude, what their fuel mixture should be, what their RPM should be, what their manifold pressure would be, and so on. And if you put these things together as outlined, you would get more miles per petrol gallon, so to speak.
That's something we never really heard about. That's really interesting to know. All the losses.
Yeah, if one were to want to read it, I don't know that anybody would, but the title of the book by this then colonel was Screaming Eagle, and you could get it from a library. Interesting to read. Ultimately, the work was brought into a temporary halt. The flying bombs had come over, and we were in such a flight path of theirs that we were getting up and out of our work, say 2, 3, 4 times a day, and at night, 2, 3, 4 times at night, getting up and heading for air raid shelters. So they shifted us out of there and sent us to a place called High Wycombe in England, and that was the headquarters for the 8th Air Force, but they were not in the flight path of the V-1s. So we completed our project there. Another little instance, the V-1s were so frequent that they moved us out of our barracks, and we were living in tents with a slit trench right in front of it. And the air raid sirens would go off, we get out of the tent, go into the slit wrench. Another little thing, one evening came home and got in my bedding, and I heard a female voice say, "Would you like to see my beautiful legs?" I didn't know anybody else was even in the tent, but I was sharing it with another airman. Just as the S sounded in legs, the air raid siren went off. I headed for the slit trench. I don't know where they went. I don't know whether she had beautiful legs or any legs for that matter. But these are just kind of little funnies or oddities. Within England, I met an English girl whom I liked appreciably, and sort of amusing when we first met, she said, "I just want a nice time." I had nothing else in mind except for a nice time. The more amusing part was one day in Hyde Park, she had brought a blanket along, and I guess we had something to eat, and it began to rain lightly. So she rolled over on top of me so my uniform wouldn't get wet. But it didn't really mean anything to either of us. We were both so young and stupid, innocent, or whatever you want to call it. Anyway, leaving England eventually, and I did like England. I liked the people. I liked the pubs, although I virtually did not drink. I'd have a nice lager with fish and chips, and that's as far as it went. One, if you want to call it beer or lager, was enough for me. I was very fortunate in that I found in some fashion the only bicycle in all of England with coaster brakes. Everything else had handlebars, and the guys were almost killing themselves at trying to stop the bikes with the handlebars. While I was in England, I just enjoyed my time there. The next stop was headed over for France. I took a flight all by myself in a C-47 transport called the Dakota. As I arrived, I'm not even sure the name of the airfield. There wasn't anybody there to meet me or greet me or to tell me how to get to where I was supposed to be going. But I heard somebody mention a code name. I thought, well, that's the same code name we had in England. So I hitched a ride in a truck, and as it turned out, God, as I got to the gate of this place, there was an officer I knew. So I was in luck. This had formerly been a German base. It came equipped with wooden bunks, straw mattresses. The straw mattresses were equipped with bed bugs. And I found out that bed bugs apparently can bite me, and they don't leave a mark because everybody else is getting up and had blotches all over themselves. Eventually the place was fumigated. At that time I had transferred yet to another outfit, the Air Technical Service Command in Europe. We had about 40 military personnel and perhaps 40 civilian technicians. And this had to do with getting up into German airfields as they were taken. The civilian technicians would evaluate the equipment as to what might be worthwhile for our forces to examine and to copy, or at least to have knowledge of. They were tied to Wright-Patterson, and finally comes back to me now, Dayton, Ohio. And the man who was our lead colonel, eventually he became a general, and he was in charge of Wright-Patterson some years later. And the idea then, and the obligation, and I had no part in that, was for them to get it transported back to Wright-Patterson, the United States, for evaluation. So that was pretty much that. And when the civilian technicians, of course, went up into areas that had been captured, they couldn't go by themselves because they were not military. So we would accompany them. We'd carried a sidearm. Unfortunately, never had to use it. While there, during the Battle of the Bulge, one given morning at about 3 o'clock a.m., lights went on and some fool comes in yelling, "Paratroopers," German paratroopers in the area, get out and draw arms. Fortunately, there didn't seem to be any in the immediate area. But I was put out on guard duty. I would have been killed had there been German paratroopers. You take Air Force people and you're going to put them out on patrol? What do they know? Nothing. At another time during the same period, I was given a Thompson submachine gun and told to guard the trailer of Spaatz, who was head of the Air Forces. It was bitter cold. This was one of the coldest winters in memory in Europe. It was miserable just being out there for that one night. I had everything on you could possibly put on, and I didn't think I was going to last through the night, but I did. Other than that, I did go up into Belgium at one time to visit one of the airfields with an officer, and spent 2 nights out sleeping on boards in the snow. And after 2 nights out sleeping on boards in the snow, I thought about the infantry, truly, how they stood that, night after night after night.
As you moved into Germany, were the airfields in good shape, or do you have to do a lot of repair or do a lot of things to make the airfields usable?
Most of them were not in good shape. They'd been pretty well chewed up, but there was sufficient in the way of aircraft sort of still assembled that sense could be made out of, and there was other equipment which I'm not knowledgeable electronically, chemically, or anything else, but that's why the civilian technicians were there. I did meet one of them, and I may still have his card at home. As best as I recall, he spoke 13 languages. He is from New York City. He owned an engineering firm, and he had said one day, he says, "Rigney, when you get out of service, if you're looking for a job, come see me." But I just completed high school, barely, when I went into the Air Force. I wasn't ready to go looking for a job. I needed to go back and go to school and to learn a little bit more than what I knew. And I only know a little bit more now than what I knew then, but anyway, that's another story. We had 3 colonels. A Christmas in France, they rented a chateau, and they put on a party for us. They supplied the food, they supplied the beverages, some were alcoholic. One played the piano, one served the beverages, and one served the food. So you got 3 colonels waiting on the troops, so to speak. They were, truly good people. And within the Air Force outfits, you weren't always saluting. It just didn't happen that way, which reminds me of one day in Paris. An enlisted man walking in front of us, an officer coming from the other way, and I saw what was going to happen. The enlisted man did not throw him a salute. The officer was going to turn around and go get him. I purposely leaned a little bit to the left. My shoulder caught his shoulder, and by the time this officer, whatever his rank was, regained his balance and senses, the enlisted man whom he was going to harass for not saluting was long gone, so nothing came of it. Unique or unusual things to happen, perhaps. I had what I call a miracle. We had a given day, a Sunday, when we had no duties. I picked up a Jeep from the motor pool. 5 other guys joined in. We hit the mess hall and got chicken and jelly rolls, which I hate, but that's all that was available, and some oranges, and we took off into the French countryside. We bought wine along the way. We had brought a softball and a baseball bat, and by the time it came time to get in around lunch, we were all feeling pretty good from the wine. We played some softball, we ate the lunch, and Lord knows where we went. We didn't have a road map, we didn't have a plan. We alternated driving, and about 10 o'clock that night, another man was driving. I was seated in the back, and there were 6 of us, 2 in front, 4 jammed into the back. It didn't have a top, and at a given time, for no reason, I yelled, "Stop." The man driving put on the brakes, and we came to a stop. He turned around, wanted to know what was wrong. I didn't have an answer for him. We just got started up, maybe hit 10 or 12 miles an hour, and discerned that the bridge over the Seine River at that point, it wasn't there anymore. There were no barricades. Of course, there were no lights, everything all being blacked out. From that day until then, I don't know why I yelled, "Stop." I talked to the man who was driving the following day, and he said, "I thought maybe somebody was falling out the back end. That's why I put the brakes on." That was the end of that story.
Well, that's quite an experience. You've seen an awful lot going across. What about people? Did you get to know people in the country? You talk about England, but France?
In France, I had the good fortune to meet, through another airman who was there before I was, a French family who were well-educated, college-educated. There were 2 daughters, a son. One son had been in the Indochina for 5 years with the French forces, and there wasn't a mother. Nothing was ever said, and of course I didn't ask, but they spoke English well. I really didn't speak any French other than a few words or phrases. At dinner, they would have wine and wine and wine and wine, and I would drink water and water and water. And 1, I didn't have the taste for wine, and 2, I probably would have fallen out of my chair had I had much wine to drink as they drank. We went sailing on the Seine River one time, and I did learn to duck when the boom went over. That's about all. I was going to use the word steal, and that's not it. I would scrounge whatever I could in the way of foodstuffs for them, because I had gone with them. They had money, they had ration coupons, but there wasn't much of anything to buy. And so I would bring them powdered eggs, I would bring them powdered milk. If we had gone to the mess hall and everybody got a couple of oranges and threw them on their bunk, when they came back, mysteriously all those oranges were gone. But they could even make something pretty good tasting out of stuff that was absolutely terrible when the GI chefs put it together. And when I left France and they knew I was leaving, they gave me a set of 3 books. They were bound in leather. They had gold scroll work on the leather bindings. I don't know what was in them. I sent them home. They got there, and I never saw them again.
Oh my goodness.
Somehow or another, they just disappeared. I have an idea, but it's only an idea.
Were you ever able to contact those people again?
I kept contact with one fellow who was pretty much like myself. If we would go to town, we would go to London. We both went out to have a nice time, as was stated as this English girl wanted. We weren't involved with girls of the night. We virtually did not drink. We might go to a movie, see the sights, go to, whatever there was, there'd be entertainment or a museum, but, we're pretty much alike. There's a fellow by the name of Bill Howe. Bill was an orphan. He doesn't know who his parents were, but he was a fine young man, and we kept our contact going for all the years after the war. And he died just about a year ago. We still keep in touch with his wife. He was my best friend in my lifetime.
It's nice that you could do that, and really, it's amazing, so many people, it's hard to keep track of.
Yeah, and he's the only one. I did get a postcard or a letter at one time from a man by the name of Mel Peterson, who was the one who introduced me to the English girl, and he was marrying a French girl in Paris. But there was no way, in any fashion, money in particular, or even inclination, I was going to go to Paris for his wedding. And I lost track of him shortly thereafter. So I just the one single person whom I stayed in touch with. I was in France until VE Day, went into Paris, had a jeep load of French girls, a couple invitations to go home for the evening for 2 or 3 of them, but I was still sweet, young, and innocent, 20 years of age, didn't go home with any of them. Went back to the base, pretty much the story. Took a ship back, seasick again all the way, and discharged in April 1945. My name being Rigney, the major, whoever he was, he looked at the discharge certificate. He was glad to have had you with us, Robert. He wasn't going to try Rigney, but that was all right.
With your story about all these girls that you met, you were showing me a picture. You ended up marrying a Marine.
Yeah, I went to a dance, and I don't dance. 2 of my friends were going up, so I'll go along. They both danced with this young lady who was quite attractive. I didn't, but I did observe. And after they had both dated her, I'm not sure how it came about, but I dated her. And thereafter, these 2 guys were totally out of the picture. And after a few weeks, I was getting to her home after work before she was getting home from work. And it didn't take too long, I guess, a few months. And I said, would you? And she said, well, you have to ask my father. I said, it doesn't appeal to me. But anyway, it did work out. We had a very formal wedding. We had a Monsignor, 2 priests. The Monsignor was a relative. And normally you give the ones who perform the ceremony, we'll call it a gratuity. In this case, the Monsignor gave me $100. So it's kind of a reverse. And we could use it. My wife just then and we didn't have $1,000 between us. We didn't have an automobile. What we didn't have, you could mention a whole lot of things, and we didn't have any of them. So we went through early years of marriage, eventually had a couple of children. We go grocery shopping, we pulled a wagon. We got to the store on the way back. The older kid was usually complaining because he had to walk home. Half the wagon was full of groceries, and only the younger boy could ride in the wagon. So that's pretty much the story of early years. One son currently lives in Golden. He works for IBM, installs electronic equipment. The other son is in Texas. He's an environmental engineer. My lady and I have been married 59 years as of April 21 this year. And if she has a fault worth mentioning, and I say this seriously, I don't know what it would be. I have a lot, and one in particular, I get crabby sometimes, and she tells me so. Which I found a little card one time. It says, nobody understands us crabby people, and she wrote on it, I do.
What did you do after the war?
Went back to school. I missed my high school graduation, really didn't marry. They gave me the equivalent of having graduated from high school. I just missed that by about 2 weeks. So I went back to school, went to college. Getting out of college, I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. So I went out to the West Coast where my friend, this Bill Howe, lived, and worked for Standard Oil on a service station for a while. Then one of my sisters was getting married in Chicago, so I drove back there. I had bought a V12 Lincoln. and it self-destructed on the way back. And the thing had to be hauled away to a junkyard, and I had to take a bus on the final way back in. I heard about a job in sales, and I took the job in sales. This was for a Continental Oil Company, Jobber. He distributed gas and oil and lubricants and fuel oils, etc. So I was a salesman for him for a number of years, but that wasn't going to go anywhere. It was just he and the few people who worked for him, fellows who drove the fuel trucks and so on. There was no place to go. I did see an ad in a newspaper from a pharmaceutical firm looking for a sales representative. I applied for it. I was interested in it. Found out later the man who interviewed me, he was interested in me, but I didn't phone him, which I guess I should have done, and he didn't phone me. But about 2 months later, the same ad appeared. The person he had hired worked in a bank, and after he'd gone through his initial few weeks of training, he went back to working in the bank when he was supposed to be out working representing the pharmaceutical company. So the job became available a second time. And it just seemed to be a shoe that fit. I was readily able to pick up on physiology and anatomy and medicines and various names of things that were totally foreign to me. Began to call on physicians' offices in Chicago. These were mostly all general practitioners. One area was highly Polish with Przybrzeżny, Wojtolewicz, Kozakevich, but I learned to pronounce all the names because this was smart to do. The other drug representative keeps saying doctor, doctor, doctor. I could say Dr. Wojtolewicz. I couldn't spell it necessarily, but I could pronounce it. So I did well there, and ultimately was asked, would you like to have the assignment of downtown Chicago, which is all specialists? And I said no, but I got it anyway. I had a boss who told you what you were going to do. So I took that, and I was successful in that. And then by request was transferred to Colorado. I had a son with asthma, and we'd been to Colorado vacationing a couple, 3 summers in a row, and he did well in Colorado. So just by luck, we got transferred to Colorado. The boss did not want to let me go, but I, by chance, came up out of the parking lot in downtown Chicago and met a man who was one of the vice presidents who had known my dad when they went to school together. And he said, "Hey, Rigney, how you doing?" And I told him about my son, Jeff. He says, "Let me see what I can do." My boss called me that evening. I said, "Oh, by the way, I saw J.C. O'Brien today. What'd you talk about?" Well, I didn't tell him, but the next day he knew what we had talked about because he'd already received a phone call that the first position open in Colorado belongs to Rigney. So I got transferred to Colorado and called on physicians here. At a given point, the position of just calling on the teaching hospitals came open. University of Colorado Medical Center, Fitzsimmons, VA Hospital, etc., all those who had staffs of residents and interns. And your project was to get your various drugs on formulary so the doctors could prescribe them, and then your job also was to convince the doctors to prescribe them, why they should prescribe them in preference to something else that might be chosen. So I was fairly successful at that, and at a given point was asked, "How would you like to be a district sales manager?" And I thought, no, you gotta be crazy to be that. I turned it down initially, and they said, "Well, when you're ready, let us know." So about a year later, I thought, well, we'll give it a try. This try led me to an interview with a man who worked out of Los Angeles and was a regional director responsible for several states. He accepted me as a district sales manager. I got one of the worst districts that existed within the company. In Arizona, there were 4 people. One was not capable. Another was selling samples, and he had a magic pen for reporting things that he did which he hadn't done. Another individual who was hired by the company at the same time I was, he couldn't sell a drug intelligently that we'd already had for about 10 years. And he quit on his own, decided he was going to go into a storm board business or something. And one other man out of Tucson, he only wanted to do part of the job. The parts he didn't want to do, he didn't do. He was told he had to do them. He decided he still wasn't going to do them, so he got terminated. These people were all replaced with good, competent, willing, able people who could learn and who wanted to produce and succeed. I went from where this district, plus I had, was based then out of San Diego. San Diego area, the people there, and I did a few hires there as well. One went from one of the very bottom districts, if not the worst in the country, to where within about 2 years we were always ranked within number 2, 3, 4, or 5 in the country in the various product lines. I represented at GD Searle. Searle was a pharmaceutical company that did not have Me Too drugs. Their current, and now they're part of Pfizer, was Ambien, which is advertised on television for people with difficulty in getting to sleep. Another drug of theirs was Flagyl, metronidazole, which could cure a woman's problem, which previously could be just treated symptomatically, but you couldn't cure it. Another thing was Lomotil or Lomotil. It was for chronic diarrheas and still being utilized today. It's gone generic long, long ago. Dramamine, it was the first of the motion sickness pills, that was theirs. So they had some really substantial products. They did not copy what somebody else had. The company was strictly straightforward. If someone did something that even slightly smelled of being improper, they were gone. I don't know what occurred. One of the vice presidents for the company did do something along that line, I guess. They gave him a half hour to clean out his desk. They put a guard with him. A half hour later, he was out of the building, never to come back. They were very straightforward, and to the best of my knowledge, never did anything that was skewed, that wasn't in an honest and forthright manner. So I represented them for close to 35 years, and then finally decided, enough, retired, been retired 20, 21 years, still have the same lady who continues to put up with me, and end of story. Another book worthwhile, unusual title, Serenade to the Big Bird. This was a B-17 pilot, co-pilot, by the name of Bert Stiles. He had 35 missions. At the end of his 35 missions, he did not go home, as he had every right to do, and get out. He was finished. He was done. He'd done all that was required of him. He decided he'd like to be a fighter pilot. They put him into a P-51. Unfortunately, he was shot down over the continent, and he was killed at age 23. But I just finished reading his book, and he had a piece of wisdom in there going all the way back to those years, we'll say 1944, 45, and he at the age of 23. If you're going to elect a politician, look into his background meticulously and know who you're voting for. He says people complain about the congressmen and the senators, but what they have is what they voted into office. And I could say today, that is as important as it has ever been in my lifetime. Every veteran that I know will be voting come November to change the structure of who represents us in Colorado. And every veteran that I know is opposed to Obama's health care. The lead man for Obama's health care, his first name is Ezekiel. I don't have a handle on the second name, but the lead man inside has said that the Obama health care plan will be based upon average life expectancy and social usefulness. Well, now every one of us veterans who's here today, at our age, we're beyond average life expectancy, and our social usefulness is nothing. Where does that leave you? It leaves you where if you need something, but the decision is made within the framework of this new health plan that, you're not going to get anything more. You've had it, you're finished, wave goodbye. End of story.